The instructor or teacher was surprised that I was living on under $40,000 a year. He goes, "You don't have any other income?" But I tried to explain to him, I don't run a standard lifestyle. Remember, I don't own a cell phone. I've never owned a new car. I've only owned 5 cars in my life. The most expensive one is my 1994 Corolla that I bought in 2006 for $3,300. I work on them still. I don't go take them to the shop and give them $2,500 to work on them. I grow vegetables in the backyard. I'm now a vegetarian. I eat out if it's a treat or somebody wants to go do it. I've graduated. I told my little third graders there in December of 2020, because I'd been around some of them since they were in preschool, that I was graduating, because one of them yelled out at me and says, "You're too young to leave." And because we're all socially conditioned that we have a certain age that we have to leave the workforce at. That is total social conditioning that I don't subscribe to. So I graduated. My school graduated me. They had a ceremony for me, gave me a certificate of 33 years of service.
You're totally counterculture. I'm fascinated by the fact that, you go against the American grain with regards to the high consumption lifestyle, and the simplicity principle that you subscribe to is really inspiring, because people think,
Appreciate it.
I can't do this on a lower income. I mean, I'm a high income professional and I live paycheck to paycheck. I'm not as much as a self-starter as you are. And it's not that I've ever heard a story like this. Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together. Oh, Bill, I'm so excited for this conversation with a good friend of mine. His name is Jeff York, but he's sometimes referred to as a wealthy custodian. And this is someone you don't hear from all the time. You have not probably heard him in many other places, but I heard him on a couple podcasts, and I thought his story was absolutely amazing. This was a guy making very little money on the salary of a school janitor. And so we dive into a lot of different things because he's still a super smart guy. And he dropped so many great gems that we just kept rolling and we turned it into 2 parts. So today we're going to hear from him on the first part.
Yeah, Jeff is amazing. Meeting him was an honor. He is so smart, and he is an educator in this space. He wants to improve everybody's financial literacy. And like I said, we could not stop talking. So we're in 2 parts. This is part 1. Look for part 2 next week. We'll see you then.
Hi, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Jackie Koski, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Yant. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm a little tired, and if I seem dull, that's because I just woke up from a night shift. I've had a series of 3. This is my life, but it's okay. I'm so excited about podcasting and talking to Jeff today. I'm on fire. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our guest today because I got to know him in the financial literacy space, and we just have a lot to talk about. And actually, our stories are kind of alike. And so I always love talking to him. And I've only heard him on a few podcasts. He's not about making the rounds, but he was one of the first people that came to mind when in getting him on the podcast. So let me just do a quick introduction. So our guest today, he's a very good friend of mine. As I mentioned, in the financial literacy space. I think we were actually together on a panel for a podcast called 403B Wise, which works with teachers and their 403Bs. And so he's often called the wealthy custodian. And he's reached millionaire status. He achieved financial independence and retired early. He may correct me on that later, but he's a millionaire. So he's going to get mad at me for even dropping that. But here's the fact, okay? This is jaw-dropping, okay? He did this all working as a public school custodian in California. His highest income, just $21 an hour. And if you're doing the math for that, that comes to about $44,000 a year. And according to the most recent report from the Federal Reserve, the median household income in America is $70,000. So he'll kill me again for saying all that and for giving all this hoopla about him, but he is incredibly impressive. And he's pretty modest about it when it comes to his own wealth, but not when it comes to teaching others how he did it. And his hope is that it's spreading financial literacy and the importance of financial education. So he is a huge financial literacy advocate like me and Bill, and we are inspired by his journey, and we know you will be too. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be on the show today and to meet Bill and have you interview me. So how would you like to start today?
Yeah, we are so glad to have you. So would you consider yourself a late starter?
Yeah, I could say that. I didn't actually do any of my first investing until end of 2002. Up until then, I had none of my financial assets in the market at all. I had to overcome a lot of conditioning by my family to become an investor.
How old were you, Jeff?
I would say, what would it be, like 39? Let me think. Let me do the math. Let's go back to, I'm 6. I've been in the market, about 22 years now?
Yeah. Well, see, that's something else we have in common. I started waking up around 38. Yeah. So we're just getting started. So I consider that a little bit of a late starter, but you know what? The average American is probably a late starter, and you pulled it together unbelievably. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So in the intro, we talked about where you were at with your finances, how you're killing it. So I want to know, how did you do it? Can you give us a rundown of where you started and how you became so savvy with money that you were able to build this kind of wealth on making such a modest income? Well,
the way to first start out is I was raised by a Depression era father. Technically, I shouldn't have had my dad that had adulted during the 30s and the 40s during the Great Depression. So he had me late in life at 42. So a lot of those values from that time period were put into me. And I'd always been taught how to be frugal and safe. And my dad would do some crazy things in the late 70s with me, like take me to a bank when I was real young and take out $10,000 worth of cash just to see if the banks would allow me to do it. When I was growing up, my dad would have $100 bills. We'd go buy cars with $100 bills, used cars. So money and cash was always around. And what was interesting about my dad was he never made it past 8th grade education, but I would say he had a master's in life skills. Street smarts would be that. And myself, I picked up a lot of those traits. And the reason I was able to get where I'm at today is I never, ever really indulged in new cars. I never had children. That's one of the most expensive things to have. And I kind of adopted some of his street smarts, he called it cutting corners. I think it's called hacking today or whatever. So I incorporated a lot of those things. Plus, I'm a blue collar person. So I use a lot of my skills to in-house a lot of services that people farm out to someone, like changing oil in their car or fixing their car, repairing the house or whatever like that. And what really started my journey off on financial independence or financial literacy was back in 1988. I started attending a junior college here and thinking that I was going to be in the white collar world. And I felt that if I worked hard enough at certain skills that I would get them. Because remember, back then, there was only really one career track that society told you that you needed to go to be successful. And unfortunately for me, going through public education, I was not really successful there. And so anyways, I started attending a junior college and trying to go through algebra and trying to be a good writer and a good speller. And oh gosh, by about 95, 96, I kind of realized that that's not really who I am. And no matter how hard you work at it, I think that people just have certain innate skills in them. I think I can make my language arts better or learn vocabulary words, but I'm never going to be a great writer or speller like my first or second wife. It's just part of who they are. So anyways, about 96, I was looking through the courses the junior college here, and they had a investments 44 class. This is in spring of 96. And I remember taking that class, and I took to it just like, oh, I really enjoyed it. Back then, they unfortunately were doing the stocks where you had to pick 5 stocks and you had to report on them. And I just learned a wealth of knowledge. And I think I got like a B or an A in the class. And what I can remember distinctly about that class was that we had to work in groups. That's a big thing, work in groups. And our group every week had to report on the stock market. What made it move? What didn't make it move? And it really gave you an understanding of that. Also, a big piece of information I picked up in the back of the book, I can remember reading about a 403B. And at that time, I'm working at Pacheco Union School District here. And I remember going into the district office because I cleaned it, so I knew everyone there. And I said, do we have a 403B? And they said, oh, yeah, we have a 403B here. And I go, oh, well, how do you set it up? Well, you have to go through some guy. So that started my whole introduction in learning about deferred comp plans, or DC plans, defined contribution plans. And also, after I passed my investment 44 class, I took a personal finance class. And that course taught you about how to track your spending and budgeting or cash flowing. And to this day, I still do it. I don't do the fancy, spreadsheet. I don't like sitting and, doing that. I still do it all by pencil, paper, track it, line it up. I use that budget book you can get, and I still track it. And for me, it provides a sense of control, even though it might be considered illusionary. But it's kind of like my little guardrails or handrails that keeps me on track. And I always like to know where I'm going. So anyways, back to junior college, I took the personal finance class. And then I opened a 403B at my school district. At the time, I'm still very conservative. I've been modeled by my father's certificates of deposit. Because remember, in the 80s and the 90s, my dad used to crow about how he could get 8% and 7% on these certificates. And I had that modeled, and I was a good saver and hadn't quite had that paradigm shift where I went from a saver to an investor, because I look at them as two different concepts. The personal finance community is probably going to throw me under a bus and back over it. But I look at savings as something in an FDIC insured account.
Right.
Investing is something that goes into the market. It goes up and down. I look at them as two different things. So anyways, I opened up a 403B, and they said, go see this particular guy. And unfortunately, he sold me an annuity. I don't get mad at that person, because it's my responsibility as a consumer to understand the product that's being sold to me. And I remember starting out with $100.
So Jeff, can I ask you this? So
go ahead.
I always worked in the corporate world, and I think, Bill, you may have had access to just a 401k as well. So the 403B, I used to always think that that was simply the version of a 401k that teachers could get. And I know I never had access to an annuity. I never even heard that. And my company picked the 401k provider. Can you just briefly tell us some of these differences that I might be missing in a 401k and a 403b? Because there seem to be some nuances that a lot of us miss.
You have to realize, from my understanding of the 403b, and I'm not an authority on it, but the 403b was started like 1958. And at that time, an annuity product was the only thing that could be inside of it. Because you remember, teachers by nature, I'm not a teacher, I'm a classified. Teachers in California called certificated. By their very nature, they're conservative, because if they weren't, they wouldn't go into teaching because their income is capped. Does that make sense? So in a 403b, it wasn't until 1974 that mutual funds were even allowed into a 403b. And that's why they call them a 403b7, paragraph 7, allowed mutual funds. Long before 401ks, I think, were accidentally kind of discovered, and we won't go into that. And you have to realize, in a school or a public sector, we have what they call a defined benefit plan, a pension plan. That's the main workhorse. In the private sector, when they shifted the risk from pensions in that world over to you, the employee, by eliminating pensions and giving you a 401k that's very individualistic. You have to contribute to it. You have to pick your investments. Right. With my CalPERS, I don't need to worry about it. It is very hands off. All I need to do is come to the school and spend 20 or 30 years there. And they automatically pull the money out of the account. Money comes out of my account that funds my PERS.
And Jeff, what's a CalPERS?
CalPERS stands for California Public Employees Retirement System. It covers 3 basic areas. It doesn't cover teachers. Teachers have their own. That's CalSTRS, California State Retirement System. Okay. And the reason they're not together, I look at them as like cousins or stepsisters, is because they're highly influenced by unions. That's why unions like pensions. It's a collectivist. It's the collective of people putting all their money into this huge pool. The employers put their money into it. Then CalPERS, the investment people, and us at CalSTRS takes that money into the capital markets and invests it and gives you a lifetime stream of income.
Yeah, and those are just about gone. Government is probably the only area you see that in, but that was where, like you said, you have whatever money taken out of your paycheck and then you get just guaranteed income for the rest of your life. And that world has changed.
Yes, and the only reason it's still in public sector is because the public sector has the ability to tax. And in the private sector, we're profit driven. I want to shift all the costs on the employees. That's why 401ks, I consider those an individualist thing. You have to put your money in it. So back to the 403b7, the reason why annuities are there, because originally when they were first set up, that's the only product that you could have in it. It's a legacy. And in California, you could have 10, 15, 20, 30 different vendors, like going to different stores to choose from. I was so illiterate, at one time I had 3 annuities and had to unwind myself out of those 3 annuities when my literacy came up. So by about 2002, that paradigm shift had switched from a saver to an investor. Because I said to myself, coming back from a CalPERS conference, I said, I already have an annuity. I have Social Security, that's an annuity. I already have CalPERS pension, that's an annuity. I don't need any more annuities. So then I had to start rolling my money out of those 3 annuities, pay some surrender charges, because the people that sold those to me got a commission. So I started to transfer those over to Vanguard once I got Vanguard on my school district's list as an approved vendor, because Vanguard isn't going to come out.
We are super excited for one of our new partners. It's called Create Your Own Financial Plan. And this is a comprehensive video course by our friend Cody Garrett. He's with Measure Twice Money, and he's been on our podcast, and we love this course that he has put out. So if you are a true do-it-yourselfer and you've been wanting to put together a financial plan, check him out. I've gone through the course myself, and I have nothing but praise for it and the quality of work that Cody Garrett does. Cody Garrett is a CFP, so you're getting the mind and the experience of a CFP that you can trust. You just need to go to measuretwicemoney.com/catching up, and you will get $100 off this course. And again, that is Measure Twice Money Catching Up.
That's interesting, because were you involved in transitioning the custodian so that you had access to Vanguard funds, or was that already the case?
No, what happens is in a school system, I was told at the time you had to go through a salesperson. What I was doing it myself, and the custodians are not in it. It's individualist. I could have 3 custodians, and Jeff is the only one going to put into this 403b7 at Vanguard because they have CalPERS as their pension and Social Security. In the private sector, 401k is your standalone. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, nobody told me, I'm part of the lost generation. Nobody told me about the transition to 401k. This is kind of a Gen X problem, really. You stumbled into finance classes. I managed to get through 20 years or more without a finance class, without anybody telling me you got to max out your 401k. I knew that this was there and I put some money into it, but I was a single digit saver. I didn't get the person like yourself pulling me aside and say, do these simple things and you'll be fine.
But you can't blame yourself, Bill, because in our society, it's really an interesting dilemma we have. We are the most marketed to society on the planet.
Yeah.
Every day you're getting marketed to. We do not promote investing or savings. We promote consumption in our country because it's hyper capitalistic. Okay. And I'm not doing a value judgment. Also, in our country, there is no formal financial literacy courses. In our country, you are educated through college to become a highly educated, highly compensated white collar worker. Or if you're a blue collar worker, you own an air conditioning business or you own a plumbing business or whatever. So it's not really promoted in our society. So don't beat yourself up. You're not the only one. I used to be completely financially illiterate and I'm still learning every day. So back to the school district, I had been putting money into these accounts. And then starting in 2002, once I got the Vanguard account open, Vanguard says, hey, we won't take money out of your check until you get $5,000 into the plan. And I'm like, how can I get $5,000 into the plan? I got it all in these other vendors. How do I get it over? Well, at the time, there was this thing called a 90-24 asset transfer, where you could transfer money from one vendor over to the next. Well, about 08, 09, IRS put some more formal rules in. You couldn't do that anymore because everything in our country, I've learned by reaching 60, is track and control. Everything is track you and control you. And the IRS and my employer didn't know Jeff York, blow janitors, transferring thousands and thousands of dollars from one vendor over to another vendor.
So Jeff, how old are you now and how old were you when you left employment at the school?
I'm 59 this April, and I left.
Happy birthday.
And I left at 55 3/4. Yeah.
So you've been retired for 4 years, roughly.
Financially independent.
Financial independence. Yeah, you could.
I'm sorry.
No, let's talk about that. So, I'm a part of the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. I use the term retire because I've kind of defined it for myself. And I work with great people like you and Bill, and I'm around people I want to be around, and I'm doing the projects I want to do on my terms. And I consider that retirement. Some people might not. But what do you call it since you stepped away from work?
I've graduated. I told my little third graders there in December of 2020, because I'd been around some of them since they were in preschool, that I was graduating, because one of them yelled out at me and says, you're too young to leave. And because we're all socially conditioned that we have a certain age that we have to leave the workforce at. That is total social conditioning that I don't subscribe to. So I graduated. My school graduated me. They had a ceremony for me, gave me a certificate of 33 years of service, a graduation certificate, and I left, and I've never looked back. I don't look at it as retirement. You remember retirement, the word, if you want to do some Google searching or whatever your engine is, it comes from Prussia, it comes from Germany, it comes from Bismarck. Retirement means to retract, to pull away, to remove yourself. That's not what I do today. Doing podcasts with you is not retired.
Well, I'm convinced that you should be a teacher. Bill, I'm sure you agree, you have dropped some terms on me that I have never dug into, talking about the 403B and the history of that. You should either be a history teacher or personal finance teacher. Like, you know a lot. So here's a question. So as far as financial literacy in high schools, I try to keep up with this as well. I know right now California is working on trying to have the requirement where every high schooler would have to take a personal finance class, a standalone personal finance class, in order to graduate. So far, we have 25 states and none of the big states, not California, not New York, not Texas, not Illinois. So what's going on in California since you've got an eye there and it's close to home for you?
Yeah, I had a link sent to me by a friend of mine that's an editor at a newspaper. And right now they're counting the ballots to put it on as an initiative, I think in either 2026, where there would be required at least a half a year or a year of personal finance in all schools in California. Right now, it's not a requirement. I have some personal experience. In 2021, I was invited, believe it or not, to come back to my own high school and talk to the 11th and 12th graders in a standalone personal finance class that was started because of the pandemic era. They needed a course that people could do. And I've been back 3 times. In February, I just completed my 3rd time talking to them.
Yay.
And just a little nugget, my first school that I cleaned here in Shasta County, I just talked to an economics class to those students about my money story. So it's ironic, the custodian that first cleaned their school in 1987 is back almost 40 years later to talk to them about personal finance. So those are some little
story.
Kind of interesting how that all worked out. Didn't plan it, just life is stranger than fiction. So anyway,
well, you have so much to teach everybody. I mean, absolutely. As a custodian, you've become one of the best teachers they're ever going to have. You
absolutely.
know, and I only support you going back to these schools and, doing these classes. Mark Troutman, that is also in the fold of Catching Up to FI as a host, he does this as well. I want to do it now too. The high school I went to didn't have it. I'm going to go and offer to do it because you get your first job and you got to know how to partition your first paycheck. If you get it right from the beginning, you're going to be on autopilot and you don't have to worry. You don't have to have your head in the sand. You don't have to be unconscious with finances, and you get interested. Once you're interested, the rest follows. You can't unsee it, and you learn how to take care of yourself. And obviously you did too.
So Bill, here's a quiz question for you. Does Tennessee, your state, require personal finance in order to graduate from high school?
Yes, they do. I know the answer to that.
Congratulations. Oh yeah, Tennessee was one of the early states. That's right.
But I was in a private school, and the private schools aren't beholden to these laws, and they didn't do it.
But see, well, Bill, you were in high school, what, 8 decades ago or something? I don't know. But they just
wait, I just heard that.
I know the year.
No, I was wondering if you caught on to that. I'm just joking. But I mean, as far as personal finance being available in any state, it's fairly recent, maybe over the last 10 or 15 years. I think in 2019, we might have had 5 states, and there was a few states before then. I didn't even have it in high school when I was going there. I mean, if you got it, it was more like that school just did it. It wasn't required. So yeah, I love these financial literacy conversations. But Jeff, you're pretty open with your finances. So I'd love to rip into that if you don't mind.
No worries. Good? I went and got numbers for you this morning.
Yay! All right. I feel special. Okay. So let's dive into the numbers for just a minute. So you're in California. Most of us consider that a very high cost of living area. So talk to us about your expenses.
Well, you remember, I live in Shasta County at the very end of this northern Sacramento Valley, and it's not what we call more of the affluent parts of California. But my expenses now, since I paid off the house in December of 2023, are about $1,000 a month.
Wow, awesome. Did you say $1,000 a month?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So that's because you don't have a house payment. And I guess the thing I didn't realize, I've always considered California, the whole state, to be high cost of living. But you're saying you can live, there are places in California that aren't necessarily a high cost of living area.
That is correct. Like when I spoke at the last high school here in Shasta County, in the town I live in, Redding, the instructor or teacher was surprised that I was living on under $40,000 a year. He goes, you don't have any other income? But I tried to explain to him, I don't run a standard lifestyle. Remember, I don't own a cell phone. I've never owned a new car. I've only owned 5 cars in my life. The most expensive one is my 1994 Corolla that I bought in 2006 for $3,300. I work on them still. I don't go take them to the shop and give them $2,500 to work on them. I grow vegetables in the backyard. I'm now a vegetarian. I eat out if it's a treat or somebody wants to go do it. I remember I'm running 1970s and 60s values. Oh, God. And there is an opportunity cost to that.
Yeah, for the car thing, boy, I sure wish I had you close to me because, yeah, they charge you through the nose to get work done on your car. And I'm like, if I had Jeff on speed dial and he was local, I'd pay him a few bucks to come look at my vehicle.
Well, Jeff, I beat you. I've only had 3 cars in my life. So I've done one thing right. They were a little bit higher cost cars and there were new ones in there, but I've taken them to their natural life. I have now 170,000 miles on my car. So good for me.
Yep. That I think it's number on my list of the 7 that I talk to the students about. It's number 3 on the most expensive. Housing's number 2. Children are number 1. Food, utilities.
So Jeff, if you don't have a cell phone, no computer, right? You got an iPad. So I was about to ask, so how are you talking to us today? Tell us where you're at talking with us today.
Right now at the library here in Redding, California, in their podcast room, because I wanted to have good sound quality for this, because I know it's very important. So I have like an kind of an unorthodox lifestyle. And, I took my 1989 house that I purchased in 2010 back to 1960. I cool with an evaporative cooler. I heat with my pellet stove. I exercise a lot. I'm outdoors a lot. 95% of all the stuff I have is used or secondhand. One of my friends used to hang out with me, goes, "You really live very well for what little you have." And I said, because it's the opposite. You can go and generate more money and pay retail prices for life, on life things, right? Or you can go my direction that I learned from my dad. It's not a wrong or right, as I tell the students. It's like algebra. Right. You can solve for X many different ways. It's whatever your values are.
So have you ever felt deprived or like you weren't enjoying yourself by doing this?
Well, I just took a money personality test, and they talked about one of the money personality types is a connoisseur. They like the finer things. I have finer things. They just were owned by someone else that paid the retail price before I came along. Are you following me?
Yeah,
and you have to, and I now enjoy experiences and freedom, like spending 2 hours in the middle of the day to hopefully impact the listeners of this podcast.
Yeah.
Is that kind of help? I'm a visionary and I'm a producer. When somebody says, "Jeff, you got to get it done," I get it done. And the vision is someday somebody listening to this podcast might say, "Well, if Jeff up in Redding, California can do it, I'm going to get on the stick and get it done."
Well, and that's how we became friends, because I heard you on another podcast. I'm like, where has this guy been hiding? And I don't subscribe to the same exact things that you do, but your philosophy and your thinking, I'm like, man, he is dropping gems.
We are excited to partner with the Investing Course by the Personal Finance Club and our friend Jeremy Schneider. He has graciously allowed us to extend the discount we ran earlier this year. Please use the code CUTOFI, that's CUTOFI, to get $30 off any of his 3 courses or the course bundle. Jeremy provides incredible value. We have taken his courses. My sister has taken his courses. You should take his courses too. They're unbelievably cheap with such a high impact. Check out Personal Finance Club and take Jeremy Schneider's PFT courses. Again, use CUTOFI when you go to his website and sign up for one of his courses. I just wanted to comment that you're totally counterculture. I'm fascinated by the fact that, you go against the American grain with regards to the high consumption lifestyle, and the simplicity principle that you subscribe to is really inspiring, because people think,
I appreciate it.
I can't do this on a lower income. I mean, I'm a high income professional and I live paycheck to paycheck. I'm not as much as a self-starter as you are. And it's not that I've ever heard a story like this. Have you found other people like yourself in Redding, or have you talked to them? Because just like the fire community, you seem a bit like an anomaly.
A friend of mine from your medical community called me a unicorn. And he says, "You're different, but in a good way." You have to realize there are values that have been imprinted into me. I don't know if it's nurture or nature. If my mom had raised me, it would have been interesting to see how I turned out. It's just who I am. I like having experiences. What custodian gets to go to Australia 3 times? I mean, those are my high status things, or my investment accounts, or my time. If I want to be at Shasta Lake till 8 o'clock last night, chasing down Alabama spotted bass in the dark to see if I can catch them, I want to have that freedom. That's my thing. If it's a lady that wants to spend time with her grandkids, more power to them. how I run my life is a reflection of my values, and I don't care what anybody else thinks.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be rude or blunt to anybody or discriminatory, but if they want to go do whatever, that's fine, because in the final analysis, you have to accept wherever you're at. I came from a broken home. People would say I was in poverty because I drank water out of a garden hose. I fished in a creek. I mean, my mom, one time when I was living with her in the 70s, we'd have to go down to PG&E and she'd flip them $50 to keep the lights on when $50 meant a lot. I can go boo-hoo, woo-hoo, woo-hoo, but I'm not going to fall into that, because I have to, in the final end, take responsibility for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that is so important, to use your own measuring stick,
Yeah.
And we have a ton to talk about. We've had some long conversations, and our lifestyles are very much the opposite, but our minds are still kind of alike. But I've never felt like I need to hop over and do what Jeff's doing, and you've never felt like you need to hop over and do what Jackie's doing. There is compatibility, and yeah, you make so much sense with what you're saying, and you've always been never minced words and was very clear about that.
Yeah,
So,
and what personal finance has done for me is provided me social mobility.
there you go.
I'm not here because I've been married since I was 21 years old and I'm a professional, or I started my own plumbing business and the business is my life. And then I've had 3 kids and we're making 100,000 in 1993 and I sold the business. No, I'm here because, and the reason I have merit is because I learned skills of personal finance and the behavior to match them, if that makes any sense. It's all behavior. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's like one of the biggest, that's one of the hardest things to change, that psychology, to be able to form this habit and all of that. And obviously it's easier when you're younger, which goes back to the whole, offering personal finance in high school. So let's dive in, continue with the numbers and everything, because I find that fascinating and almost unbelievable. And probably some of our listeners do too. So when you were working, so this would have been pre-2020, what year did you retire?
I left at the end of 2020. My highest income was $47,000, because remember, that's when COVID money's flowing in and they're giving me overtime. But if you had looked at my Social Security earnings history, because when I mentor people, I always ask them, go to ss.gov and pull up their history. When you look at mine and you average it out over 38 years, it works out to be about $26,000 a year. But I say that's an F. I get an F on that part, because I didn't increase my skill set to increase my income. Because if you're going to build wealth, you got to have income. And generally, if you have a wife or a spouse or whatever your gender preference is, that changes the whole equation. And then unfortunately, people get on the hedonic treadmill and start jacking it up. And, we got to build a bigger house and we got to scale to the next one. But that's kind of changed now. So I'm not being judgmental. I'm just telling you that's kind of the herd mentality.
So you were just doing more with the money that you had.
Exactly. I am hyper efficient. Even in my fishing, I'm efficient. All my fishing equipment's 50, 60, 70 years old for $5 or $10 at a thrift store. I have several mentors. They kind of laugh at me when they see me bring that stuff in, but I love fish. They don't discriminate. If they like it, they'll hit it. Like my house, I cool it with an evaporative cooler. It'll get to 80 degrees. Other people are going to melt. When other people in my neighborhood's units are trying to find 110 degrees here, I'm sitting at 70 degrees.
So where's Redding located? Is it Northern California, Southern California?
It's Northern California. I'm 145 miles north of Sacramento, at the very end of the valley.
Okay, so it's a little cooler. It's a little cooler up there than Southern California, right?
No, it is hotter. We're in
it's hotter. Okay.
We have no access to the ocean. We can be as hot as Las Vegas here. When it's 100 or 105, I'm happy. When it starts bothering me is when it pushes to 115.
Wow.
That's when it starts bothering me. And I know my older body won't be able to handle it. But here in the wintertime, it'll get down to like 30. My house will drop to 55. My friend goes, how do you handle that in there? I said, because I exercise all the time and my metabolism is burning hot. It's whatever your value systems are. You know what I'm saying? It's not a right or wrong. I mean, if you want to keep it at 70, fine. But when I go fishing outside, It's not a shock to my system, that change between hot and cold. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. So that was a great geography. See, you need to be a geography teacher. You need to be a personal finance teacher. You need to be a math teacher for all of that.
No, I'm not. So to me, it's not a hard thing.
You make it look easy. I have to tell you that. So,
yeah. And people ask me, what is the money for? The money is for choices.
Right. Choices and options. That's
you
right.
got it right. Well, let's jump into the numbers because I'm sure people are wanting to know where we're going here.
Yeah. Bill, did you have something?
I just want to know before we get into the nitty gritty, have you ever read Jacob Lundfisker, Early Retirement Extreme?
Never have, but am I doing some of his behavior in that book?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I recommend that book because
I will.
His lifestyle is not too dissimilar from yours, and he retired early as well. So it can be done, and let's find out how you did it.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're making about $47,000 a year. You said today, now this is where you've paid off all your debt. Your expenses are about $1,000 a month, which is still unbelievable. But when you were working, so prior to 2020, before you graduated, how much were you saving and where were you saving it? Because you talked about these different plans and stuff like that. Give us a rundown on that.
You have to realize the reason I was able to do it is my housing costs throughout my life have always been low. I lived with my dad. I lived in someone's backyard for 14 years in a mother-in-law cottage for $350 a month. And remember, my utilities are included. Mm-hmm. I can fix my truck. And you have to realize at that time when I moved in there in 92, I'm only bringing home $900 a month from the school district, working full-time as a janitor.
Wow.
Okay, because we got to pay into CalPERS. There's 7% to come magically out of my check. 1.45 has to magically come out of from Medicare. 6.20 magically pulls out of Social Security. And then I start putting money in a 403b7 or 403b before I, in 2002, went into mutual funds. Before then, I had IRAs. I used to chase CD money, move my IRAs to get different CDs and stuff because they were 6 and 7%. So I've always been that way. So that housing cost. And then when I met my first wife, I moved in with her and we didn't scale up our lifestyle. We didn't scale in.
So I'm curious. So you mentioned, I think, plural wives. So how did that factor into your habits and your lifestyle? So you were married. So tell us a little bit about that, because I feel like if it's just you, it's a different approach than when you're partnered or you have a spouse.
Yeah, this is important, Jeff, because we have a very active community that have struggled with divorce. These late starters that in midlife,
myself included,
or later in life, have this financial trauma where they're splitting up their net worth.
Okay, here's this story. You'll like this one. This one, I'm an unusual person. This person was about 11 years older than me, and they're from the baby boom generation. And I kind of have some of their values because I'm born in 1965. Anyways, when her and I got together, she had just finished her second marriage.
Now, Jeff, what year is this and how long ago is this?
We're going to go back to 2003, 2004.
So is this wife number 1 or 2?
One.
Wife one. Okay.
And she's older than me. So she has children that are only about 11 or 12 years younger than me. Okay. Kind of like going into a hornet's nest, but we won't go into that. Kind of like I'm an advanced calculus of relationships. Okay.
Right.
So anyways, we get together. And she's got some frugalness in her, but she's also a baby boomer. And she was late to working. She was married for 25 years and raised 2 children and came into teaching at age 42. Okay. And she had the frugal gene in her. So she liked me because, one, I didn't have any kids, right? And she liked me because I was good with my money, because first or second husband was not good with his money, and he was a principal. So anyways, we get together and we talk, and she goes, I love teaching, but it's really hard to handle certain things. I want to get out. I go, do you want to be out by 60? And she goes, yeah. And I think she had just turned 50 at that time when we got together. And I said, do these things. And we did it. We didn't scale up our lives. Her house had paid off. I won't go into all that story, how that happened. But what I did was started shoveling money in, because the cars are paid off. The house is paid off.
Wow.
I thought we did a lot of things. We traveled around the country. We went to Australia once together. We lived in a 1,600 square foot house in an inconspicuous place. And what happened was in '08, remember, when the world's falling apart and the housing market's going down, down, down. She's a smart cookie. She goes, my house isn't worth $300,000. I go, you sure right, it's not worth. You know, remember they send little advertisements in the mail trying to get you to sell back then? And then the market started going to heck in a handbag. And she goes, I'm nervous. I'm freaked out. I said, what do we do? And I've told this story 100 times. I go, what do we do when we buy boneless, skinless chicken for $1.99 a pound? She goes, I know, we buy a bunch of it at Rayleigh's and put it in the freezer. I go, what are we going to do? She goes, we're going to keep putting money in the market. I did something I coined extreme paychecking. You're going to love this one. I blew it on this. I put my whole paycheck into my 403b7 account, would be your 401k. You're going, Jackie's eyes just kind of popped. She goes, how do you put your whole check in there, Jack?
Yeah, what'd you live off of?
I had savings.
Ooh, there you go.
We have no house payment, and she cut me the deal where all you have to pay is the property taxes and half the food bill. And technically, she should pay more because she made 2.5 times more as me as a teacher. If you want to do it as a percentage to make it even. Right. I used to argue this out with my dad. So one day I came home and I showed her what I was doing. She freaked out because I think she thought I was kind of using her, but I don't know. That's the dynamics with money because you don't talk about it. And I had to actually go to payroll and tell them what I was going to do. I had to keep enough money in to pay my Social Security tax. I had to keep enough money in there to pay Medicare. Had to have enough money to pay my union dues and my portion of my medical, right? Because my district's cap's not covering it. I had to also make sure there's enough for the PERS and my union dues. And I zeroed out all the taxes because I didn't earn anything.
Yes. So this is in '08. And this is after you took that personal finance class at that community college.
Yeah, personal finance class was back in '96. Yeah, we're back. We're moved forward. By 2002, I'm already investing in Vanguard and everything directly through. And what was beautiful back then at Vanguard, when you had a 403b7, you could add any type of asset class to your menu to invest in. I developed my own asset because on a 401k, the employer's in control.
Right.
And
there's like a list.
You can only be. Now, today, you can't do this. If you go to Pacheco Union School District and look up their 403b7 at Vanguard, it's going to be very unique because it's legacy. It's something I created because a lot of the asset classes that you can invest in are not on other 403b7's school district accounts in California. Does that make sense?
So Jeff, can I ask you about the vehicle? So you had a 403b and a 457? You had both of those?
At one time, I actually, in 2004, I brought the first 457 to Pacheco School District in any school district in Shasta County.
So you can have a 457 and a 403b at the same time and contribute to the max. Now, 457, is that the one where once you separate from service, you can take withdrawals without a penalty?
10% penalty. Yeah, you remember a school district.
That's a superpower right there. We love.
Yeah, but 99% of the people don't have that superpower. My first wife and I, we had the superpower because she wasn't providing economic outpatient care to her 30-something kids at the time. I'll use that from the Millionaire Next Door book that I read back in the 90s.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. So our social media is Diana Falk, our editor, Fritz Bassard, and show notes are done by Sarah von Sternberg. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you want to support the show and what we're doing, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to virtually say thank you if you get value from our content. The link is in the show notes, or you can head over to our website at CatchingUpToFi.com and click on the Support the Podcast tab at the top right. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to Fi. We would appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
While we are financial educators, and I'm a financial professional that loves to teach, our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to 5.